is what you're going to need for our project. Couple balls of clay and perhaps a bit extra depending on what your design is. If you are home working with air dry clay, you may want to take a bit off of each of the balls to give yourself some extra to work with. You'll also need water and some tools. Artists, you'll have a couple different options for creating a ceramic piece. One option is to make a piggy bank, and I do have these rubber stoppers and of course tools that can be used to create a slit for money to be dropped into your bank, or you could also make a figurine of some type. It would be made in basically the same way. The only exception would be that you wouldn't need a rubber stopper. Now, in both cases, we're going to be trying a technique where you make two pinch pots and then put them together. And that is going to form the base for your design. And it's a very flexible shape. You could use it a lot of different ways. It also is going to create a hollow shape, which is perfect for drying and then firing our clay. Here is how you make a pinch pot. To make a pinch pot, you're going to start with your first ball. Some students really work hard to make the ball perfectly smooth, and that's really not necessary at this step. And a lot of times it just dries out the clay. Clay is similar to pie crust, that the more you work it, the tougher and drier it gets. So I don't want to spend the time right now trying to make it perfect on the outside. I will do that more later. So I'm going to just get a little bit rounder, call it good. Then I'm going to use my thumb and push that, not all the way through, but to make a hole here, almost like you've made a cored an apple. And here's what you're going to do. Sometimes when we talk about pinch pots, students think that the movement is this kind of movement, like pinching like someone in a way that you would on St. Patrick's Day. But the pinch is really more of this movement. So what I'm going to do is put my thumb in there, and it's more of a squeeze and rotate. Squeeze and rotate. Squeeze and rotate. And so I'm going to keep doing this process until I get most of that clay pressed out in a nice, probably more on the thick side edge, just because I'm going to be using this for attaching right now. This would be way too heavy and take a long time to dry. So I'm going to press this out a little bit more and then do the same with this one. All right, so now I have two pinch pots, roughly the same size. You may have noticed that I checked them in there in my process just to make sure that I didn't have one that was so small it would end up fitting in the other one. Now you can see that there are some gaps here. One thing that you can do is to just tap your pinch pot top on the surface of the table, and this can help to create a little bit more even surface where those match better. Now to do the attaching, I'm going to need a scoring tool, and you may remember this from prior years. Whoops, here we go. Scoring is when you scratch the surface, and the purpose of the scoring when you add that water is almost to make like a little cement where these two pieces can really be glued together. If you have a different kind of scoring tool or skewer, you can just do little hash marks like that. So I'm going to score both of the sides, and then I'll be adding a little bit of water that creates what's called slip, and that's going to act as our glue. Now that I have the scoring and the slip, I'm going to press these together. Make sure that I have a good amount of contact there. And then I'm going to use one of the sculpting tools. It looks like I just have a stick right now. And I'm going to start to see if I can blend these two pieces together. So even though I am using two pinch pots, I don't necessarily want it to look like two pinch pots that are stuck together. So I'm going to work on this and then smooth the surface. So this is what mine looks like. Yours may be, depending on the shape of your pinch pots, a little more round or a little bit more elongated. This is going to be perfect for my idea that I'm hoping to do. I am taking inspiration from William, the hippo. He is an Egyptian kind of ceramic that was found in the tombs of the pharaoh. And it goes back to my childhood because my parents had some Williams on display, and so I always had an affection for this. So I'm thinking of doing some sort of hippo and then adding designs that are more relevant to me and my memories. So that is my plan. So my next step, once I have the basic shape, is to consider the other parts I might need and to sculpt those. So obviously I'm going to need the forelegs and then the neck area. So I'm going to go ahead and get some materials that I think will work for that. So I've gathered what I'm going to turn into the forelegs, and then this piece that I'm hoping to kind of open up like a pinch pot and then attach, kind of build out the neck area and then attach to the body. One of the things that you'll notice is any of the really large areas like the body and the head, I am creating kind of a vent, so there's going to be a way for the air to escape. So I have to make sure the piggy bank makes it a little bit easier because I'll be cutting an opening, but we have to make sure there's a way for any moisture to escape during the firing process. So I'm going to spend a few minutes and work on sculpting these pieces, and then I will be attaching them using that scoring and slip method. Now that I have the basic structure, I think, of the head and the legs, I'm going to work on attaching and then blending these together. I won't do any of the subtractive part or any of the fine details until I have the basic structure done. So I just used the scoring and slip to attach the legs. You can see it's still kind of rough now. So I'm going to spend a couple minutes smoothing this out and getting all this looking cohesive, like it's just one piece, and then we'll talk about how to do the next step. Let's talk about now how you would do additive and subtractive features, because both are required on your project. So remember that additive features are when you add something onto your piece using scoring and slipping. In this case, even the legs would actually qualify as a additive feature that I put on. For some of you, it may be really helpful when creating your little pieces to use these little teeny tiny cookie cutters. Sometimes they can create a shape that, I mean, obviously it's like a circle, but it might help create, you know, a button on a controller that you're making, or an eyeball, or it could be a lot of different things. Or perhaps you can cut a piece off. For example, let's say you're making a little penguin. You could do a triangle piece, or you could create a triangle, you know, using the square, get 2 triangles. So you may want to think creatively or flexibly about that. I'm going to need 2 ears, and so I think those are my only additional additive pieces. And then for subtractive elements, when you're adding a texture, taking something away, you can use these wire tools. They come in a bunch of different shapes, and if you test them out just on a piece of clay, you'll see that what they do is remove, you can create a groove or a subtractive area, and it removes that ribbon of clay so that you can get rid of it. You could also do something similar, creating an impression with one of these tools as well. So these can be really handy. The only thing you need to be aware of is some of them, you know, they can really remove a large section, and so you want to make sure you don't unintentionally gouge an area or create a hole. And so I would suggest starting light and then adding, you know, you could always take out more if you need to. So I'm going to work on my additive features and my subtractive features now. So I added on the ears, and of course I did the legs earlier and the head itself. And then the subtractive parts are just these little nostrils and a smile. I decided to give my hippo a smile, even though real hippos are like deadly creatures. I think fondly of William, and to me he was always a happy little guy. So feel free to give your own personality and meaning to your piece. So the basic structure is done at this point, with the exception of the hole if you're making a bank, or the slit. So if you're doing that, I would be happy to help you, but we're going to use a knife to cut through the top, and then at the bottom we would use the matching sized circular cookie cutter, and that I would suggest would go on the bottom. Now I have actually decided not to make mine into a piggy bank. It would work really well, but I still am going to need to vent this, and so after I smooth it all out, I'm going to be using the knife. I know it looks like kind of, you know, surgical, but I'm going to vent this with a little hole, and that way I can make sure that air can escape. I may go ahead and vent these nostrils as well using one of these tools or a needle tool. I may just go all the way through the clay just so that head has a vent as well. So that is going to be my last step, and then we will fire these and come back to them a little bit later. This is how my hippo turned out. So he's pretty nice and smooth. You'll see that I did use that clay knife tool, and I stuck it in there and twisted to remove a little bit there, and I used a needle tool to vent the nostrils. So at this point, our pieces are going to be ready to dry. We will put them on a shelf, let them air out, and then I will have them fired for your next rotation when we'll talk about the glazing process. Have fun.